Hey guys, this is your math helper for lesson 11 on module 2. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about how to multiply um, multi-digit numbers with decimal fractions that are in the hundredths place. Yesterday we learned and we talked about um, multiplying a digit in the tenths place. And we worked on two strategies. One was renaming, where we talked about, well, we can rename this 13 and 5 tenths. We can rename that as 135 tenths, and then we can multiply accordingly. We also learned that if we have 13 and 5 tenths and we multiply it by 10, we would get 135. But then once we have our final product, we can go ahead and then divide that by 10, and we would end up getting our correct placement as far as our standard form goes. So what we're going to work on today is then a couple problems about the hundredths, going down in the hundredths. Basically the same strategies that we worked on yesterday as our tenths are going to also work today in our hundredths. So let's go ahead and start out. Let's do 7 and 38 hundredths multiplied by 41. And whenever we're doing something like this, it's always a wise idea to round an estimate first, so that you can understand when you're looking at your final product, number one, was it appropriate? Is it an accurate product? But then also it'll help you with your place value, with your decimal placement. And I'll show you how that works in a second. So rounding this down to 7 and rounding this also down to 40, I'm looking at a product of around 280. But I know that since I rounded both of those down, that my final product will actually be a little bit higher than 280. I'm going to put that arrow over there so I remember. So if we're looking at this in terms of an area model, wow, that's a really wonky rectangle. Please excuse my rectangles. I would do 738. I'm going to rename this as 738 hundredths. And then I don't have to worry about that decimal. So now I can start to multiply. I can put this in here. I can put 700, and I'm going to break this out as far as the expanded form. 700, and I also have 30, and I also have 8. And coming up, I have 40, and I also have 1. Okay, and so 7 times 1 would be 700. This one's going to be easy, and I have 30, and I have 8 because I'm multiplying all by 1. 7 times 40, or 700 times 40, well, I know 7 times 4 is 28, and I have 3 zeros to add to that, so 28,000. I have 4 and 3 is 12, plus my 2 zeros, so that's 1,200. And I have 40 and 8 is 320. And so looks about right. So if I go ahead and add to the right, I'll be looking at 738. And if I add this to the right, I'm looking at 29,520. All right. And if I go ahead and add those up, 738. Now both of these I have to remember are thousands. No, sir. Are hundredths. Okay, and hundredths, and both of these are also hundredths, so that I'm not losing track of that. 8 and 0 is 8, and 3 and 5 is 2, 7 and 5 is 12, and 9 and 1 is 10, 2 and 1 is 3. So I'm looking at around 30,000. I'm looking at 30,258 hundredths. And if I'm looking to put my final product in here, well, I'm seeing that these are all hundredths, and so that tells me that I know that this 8 right here is in the hundredths place. And so then that means my 5 is in the tenths place, and then my decimal will be right there. So I know that I have 302 and 58 hundredths as my final product for this. Now, looking at this, let's say I didn't want to go back through all of that process and say, oh, that's where this goes. I could look at my estimate up here of around 280, and I see this. I have 30,000 here, so I know my product's going to be about 280. It's going to be in something in the hundreds. It's not going to be in the thousands. It's not going to be in the tens. It's not going to be in the 10,000s. My product is in the hundreds, and so if I go ahead and isolate out 100 here, that would be 302 and 58 hundredths. And so That's another way of looking at this, is to use your estimate to go ahead and give you a final product. The other way that we've talked about doing this, 7 and 3, 8 times 41. The other way we've talked about doing this is to say that you can multiply this to get that decimal place out of there. And we know that if I wanted to move this over 2 place values, times 10 would move it over 1, and if I multiply it, if I make this number 100 times bigger than it is right now, that's going to go ahead and kick that decimal place to the curb over here, boom, and so then I can go ahead and multiply accordingly. So let's do that. 1 and 8 is 8, 1 and 3 is 3, and 1 and 7 is 7, right? 4 and 8 would be 32, but that's 320, so 320, and 4 and 3 is 12, plus 1, 2, plus 3, and 12 is 15, and 4 and 7 is 28, plus 1 would be 29. Now my partial products over here match up, shows 738. Partial product here matches up, shows 29, 520. So I can add those up. I got 8, I got 5, I got 12. Carry my 1. 9 and 1 is 0, and 1 and that is 3. And I get my 3258, which does match up with down here. Now I'm going to take that comma out of there because I want to just go ahead and deal with this directly. Up here I multiplied by 100. And so our strategy here tells us that if we multiply at the top by 100, then I need to do the reciprocal here on the bottom, and I need to divide it by 100 as well to go about getting my final product. If I'm dividing by 1,000, I'm moving the decimal place over by 2, 1, 2, and I'm putting that guy right there. I'm getting my product of 302.58 hundredths. And so that does work for me. That's correct, and everything is all good to go. Okay. We could go ahead and take a look at another one. I'll go ahead and touch upon one. 82.51 multiplied by 63. Once again, I'm going to go ahead and try to give myself the best estimate possible. If I take roughly 80 and roughly 60, I have, what do I have? 48. 48, and I got 2 zeros. So I'm looking at an answer around 4,800. I know that that's in the 4,000s. I know that my actual product will be a little bit higher than that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm not going to worry about an area model on this one. I'm just going to go ahead and multiply, multiply here, Zynga. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to walk this one out. I'm going to multiply it by 100 to get that guy the heck out of there. And so now I'm just left with a nice clean multiplication problem here. And so let's do it. 3 and 1 would be 3, and 3 and 5 is 15, and 3 and 2 is 6, plus 1 would be 7, and 3 and 8 would be 24. 6 and 1, or 60 and 1 is 60. 6 and 5 is 30. 6 and 2 is 12, plus 3 is 15. And 6 and 8 is 48, plus 1 would be 49. I'm going to do this down here. I got 3. I got 11. I got 8. I got 9. I got 11. And I got 5. So, taking a look at this, I know my product, my estimated product was 4,800, something in the thousands. So if I take that and I'm just doing that, I'm looking at my thousands right here. And so I would say somewhere around my product would be, my final product would be 5,198 and 13 hundredths. That would be reasonable to say, because I could also look at that and know that I have 2 up here that were in my in the hundredths, and I have down here I also have hundredths. I could also divide, like I said up here, I multiply by 100 to get that decimal place out of there. So if I went here and I divided by 100 to get it back in, I could scooch it over by 2, and let's look at the same product here of 5,000. Get that out of there. fix this up so it looks nice. We'll get that product to 5,198. So it's just all about really how are you dealing with the decimal. You have several ways that you can do that. Whatever way works best for you and is most comfortable for you to use, you should use. When it comes to this, it really is about being meticulous and careful with your placement of your numbers and everything else. So try and be solid on that. Try and be careful about your math. It's like the very thing that it's a thing that needs to be that needs some care. I'm a man of very simple words right now. It needs your meticulousness, because if you mess up one digit, you can go ahead and throw off your whole problem and get a wrong product. So don't be afraid to get a wrong product. You guys are doing great. I'm really, really proud of you. Keep up the hard work, and have a nice night.